Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Maz and I are obviously, he's at his office, I'm in the kitchen. There's construction in the basement of our house, so we'll see how that works out. My internet kind of conked out on me earlier. We're just going to hope for the best and see how this all goes. But I also have to say that on Tuesday, I feel pretty confident that I told you at the end of our conversation that we would absolutely be live today. That was also a mistake. We are not live today. We're doing a pre-record. So just
We're almost live, lover.
Well, we're live as we're doing it, but you're not watching it live. So at any rate, rather than get caught up in that, I am excited to introduce you to our guest who was introduced to us through Arlena Allen. You might remember we had Arlena on from the One Day at a Time podcast. I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 weeks ago. But let's bring forward Michelle Farris to join us. Hi, Michelle.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me. This is lovely.
Oh, we're so happy to have you here. And we'll just hope for the best. You probably heard me say everything's been a little topsy-turvy today. So we'll just see how it plays out. Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for joining us, Michelle. Why don't you just quickly give us a little bit of backstory about who you are? Tell us what an LMFT is.
So that's Licensed Marriage and Family Therapist.
Great.
So you go through the education, the master's program, the hours, that kind of thing. And I'm also an anger management specialist, which is just another certification.
So you're on with us today because you have both sort of a personal, you have a personal connection to an addiction journey, and then you also work with it. So maybe you just want to start with your kind of there to hear story of your own journey.
Sure. So ironically, I got introduced to 12-step programs at 12 when my best friend got sober. And at 12 years old. Wow. Pretty amazing. Yeah.
If there's a winning for youngest sober person we've talked to, your best friend wins.
No kidding. No kidding. And so I went to AA meetings with her and I loved it. But I wasn't an alcoholic, so I couldn't go. So I don't know, maybe a couple months into it, she said, well, they have one for food. And I said, oh, no. So as much as I loved it, I was not willing at that point because I'd always been had issues with food since birth. I'm sure I was born with it. But it was so, looking back, it's like, even though I knew I had trouble, I was not willing until fast forward. I was 21. I went to college for a little while, bombed out because when you come from a dysfunctional family and you don't have any tools and and you try to live a happier life, it doesn't go well. And it did not. So I came home from that and my best friend at the time said, why don't we try an OA meeting? And I specifically said, why don't we go to a restaurant instead? Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's addiction, right? That's addiction. And because she was my binge buddy and we would eat together. And I'm so grateful that she said, no, let's go. She pushed me a little bit. And I always think back because I could have missed that. So I started my recovery. Then I started Codependency Recovery because once you're in addiction recovery for a few years, you really notice how dysfunctional your relationships are. At least I did. So I had to be willing to be a newcomer again and start Al-Anon. And that was when I had the perfect marriage of recovery. I felt like I had my bases covered and that was really, really lovely. And while, it's not a perfect journey, it's definitely a journey for me that's so worth it. It's so worth the pain because what do they say? The worst day in recovery is better than the best day out of recovery. And I really believe that.
Wow. So you're a pretty close second starting at 21. That's young too.
It is. I think for food, you're either, at the time there were a lot of 50-year-old women there, but there's a lot of young people going in because of anorexia. Sure. That's a very deadly disease. So when you have that, you tend to come in typically younger. But yeah, I was really grateful that I got to come in young. And my father was in recovery at the time from alcohol. And we actually attended a John Bradshaw workshop together.
Wow.
So that was pretty cool.
Yeah. It's interesting. We've talked to some other children of addicts who also had your life sort of revolves around AA if you're part of a family who has a member who goes there. So it's not that surprising that that was a comfortable place for you and that you found commonalities. That's just we see that sort of happening over and over as we're talking to guests who have generational experiences with this.
Yeah.
Okay, so you began the journey of conquering that and then somehow landed up as a licensed marriage and family therapist. So how did that become the door that you walked through?
Well, around the same age, I don't know what possessed me, but I asked my mom if we could go to therapy and she said yes. I don't know how she said yes, but she did. And I felt so supported in that process. She had her therapist, I had my therapist, and then we would do family. And I just knew, I thought, this is something I really love. So, and I was always focused on feelings. I was a sensitive kid. I always tried to figure out what was wrong with my family and never could. And so all of that kind of made me very willing to become a therapist.
Interesting. So how long have you done this work?
Let's see. I took a long break when my son was born, but probably about 15 years.
Oh, okay.
But I've been in recovery for 33. So I definitely so maybe I've been working more than that. I didn't take 15 years off, but yeah, about that.
Okay. So now you have a program called Counseling Recovery, and I'll put the link in the meeting notes. So tell us a little bit about that, because one thing that I think has been so illuminating through COVID is just how much work can be done online, how many more resources and doors it opens for people, because now you're not geographically limited to who can I drive to see. Suddenly the world is kind of your potential for therapy, help, treatment, all those kinds of things. So talk about that for us.
Yeah, well, I definitely noticed, for me, it was a smooth transition because I had already done a few sessions on Zoom. But the convenience, thank God we had Zoom through the pandemic and people could go to 12-step meetings online because they all immediately morphed into Zoom meetings. And I noticed a lot of my product sales went way up the year of COVID because people were searching. And for me, it was so lovely to see the willingness, like people were hungry and people were wanting help and were motivated. And, in a weird way, even though the pandemic in terms of mental health was not good for many, it did open the door for a lot of people to seek help.
Maz, maybe you want to talk about sort of your understanding of in-person versus virtual and how that shifted for you, because maybe Michelle will have some thoughts around that.
When the pandemic first hit, I was because everything shut down. In fact, I was trying to get a good friend of ours, who's a guest in our show, to come to his first AA meeting with me. He just got out of therapy. We met in the parking lot. Everything was great. There was a little handwritten note on the door saying treatment center shut, no AA meeting. And there was no, hey, we're going somewhere else. There was nothing for 3 weeks. And then it started filtering down to us. They'd set up a Zoom meeting. We got the Zoom address. And for about 3 months, I went every Friday. There was 15 of us. And then, I hate to say this, but because I was used to 60 or 70 people and it was a treatment center, so every other week there was at least 23 new people.
Yeah.
And I love that because I could say something that, listening to them, because I've been sober long enough to actually be able to feel like I could say something useful. I love doing that. And then listening to the same 15 people, just how their week was. I hate to say the word monotonous, but that's kind of how it got.
I think that was really common. A lot of people got zoomed out and unfortunately left. And, I agree. It's definitely, it definitely wasn't easy to connect. I think that's the difficulty, is it is harder to connect on a 12-step meeting when you don't feel someone. And,
That's it.
that,
There was a lack of connection. That's exactly it.
right. And then nobody said, hi, Maze, right?
Yeah.
Because it was silent. And so there were a lot of little rituals we missed because we couldn't do them on Zoom. So I totally understand. We had a lot of influx meetings in OA too. But the other thing I noticed was a lot of people came from other countries. And that was really cool. Like you could
A lot of
see
people visiting from out of state.
Yeah. Yep.
They were like trawling which state to go to an AA meeting, which was kind of cool.
Yeah.
But my dad always told me that you should always think of a positive. So my positive to all of that was, AA meeting. We finally got to know each other's last names. A lot of us became friends on Facebook. We actually knew who we were.
Right. Well, we had to.
Maz got disconnected. Well, I assume he'll come back when he can. Okay, so let's talk about the products. Oh, there he is.
Oh.
Not sure what happened to you, Dr. Mary.
I have no idea.
It was like a hiccup. Anyway, I was saying to Michelle, let's talk about some of the products and materials that you've developed in your work, because I think we have an audience that I think really craves meeting new people, hearing their stories, learning more about them. So share some of that with our audience.
Sure. So my very first product was an anger course, which is now a 4-week Zoom course. And I started that in the middle of COVID, and boy, was that popular. And it still is, because for me, like I researched what other professionals are doing, and I see courses for 12, 16 weeks. I'm sorry. I, as a person of recovery, would not last 12 weeks. That's a long time. Because people burn out, especially on Zoom. So I made 4 weeks in and out. You get the skills to manage your anger, to take care of yourself, to communicate better. But honestly, a lot of the products I created were gaps in my own recovery.
Oh, you were your best test case.
Yeah, because I thought, okay, 20 years in, 25 years in, what did I miss? Well, I missed self-trust. I had no desire to really cultivate a relationship with myself until much later in recovery, because I was too addicted to people. So I created a self-trust journal. I created a codependency workbook, all the things that for me, I wish somebody would have given me, because it would have highlighted more issues faster. I just thought, I'm just going to, and for me, it's a creative process, because it kind of brings together my professional and my personal passion. So I love that.
Michelle, can you talk about codependency? Because first of all, I think a lot of people have codependency issues and maybe don't even understand that you can cross into sort of an unhealthy level of codependency. And I guess my first question for you is there such a thing as healthy codependency?
So there is such a thing as, there are some traits like giving, generous, volunteering, that at the core are healthy, but become codependent when we're out of balance. So if I give, even though it hurts me, that's codependency. If I love you so much that I can't live without you, that's codependency. But if I love you and I still have myself and I still have my own life, that's healthy. That's the goal.
But that is
so
a thin line.
It is a thin line, because we're taught to focus on, finding our prince, finding somebody to complete us, instead of looking at ourselves and going, okay, how do I feel about myself? And can I be centered in myself enough to have a healthy relationship, or do I need you to feel happy? Because that's where the danger lies.
Sure.
That is really interesting, because Dana beat me to this question, because when I saw that, I'm doing the pure academic. I've got a cheat sheet of your stuff up here.
I love it.
It says codependency, and I read a question mark, because in my mind, until you said that, codependency and the experience I have from it is a drug addicted alcoholic or an alcoholic drug addict, depending on which one you went for first. So hearing your spin on codependency is really interesting.
Yeah. The other thing I added, and I added this from Ross Rosenberg, which I loved, was it's also a deficit in self-love. And that sets us up to depend too much on others, to get our worth from what we're doing instead of who we are. Because think about it. If we feel really good and solid within ourselves, we don't need to be codependent. We don't look outside of ourselves for that validation, even though some of that is normal. But if that's 90% of how we get our validation, then that's definitely for sure codependency. But I added that self-love piece because I do think that drives the behavior, the lack of.
So can you give us, without giving away your coursework, can you give us, like, what's one thing somebody could do to move from maybe self-loathing to self-love? Because I feel like find a human who doesn't have
Exactly.
a fair amount of loathing.
Exactly. Well, one of the things I say in my anger class is that if I sat down with you for 10 minutes and heard your story, your behavior would make total sense to me. Your anger, your hurt, your dysfunctional behavior, because we do it because we're hurting and we've learned these behaviors. We didn't sign up someday and go, I'm going to be a jerk, right? Yeah. It's really, I don't know how to live life. And the only tools I have are what I learned from mom and dad or what I learned from growing up. And those are often insufficient. So to me, that's the first step in having compassion for yourself. Even I used to teach a 52-week anger management program, and I loved it because every guy in there witnessed abuse. Every guy in there witnessed unhealthy anger. So of course they're going to grow up and have violence and those tendencies because they didn't learn anything else. Yeah. So to me, there's just a lot of compassion for, none of us signed up for this.
Yeah, isn't that true? I was thinking about a friend of mine's dad who was had served active tours in Vietnam and came home with a lot of problems. And I don't know why I was thinking about him this morning, but I was just thinking, what might his life have been like?
Oh, yeah.
What might his marriage have been like? His relationship with his children had that enormous traumatic disruption not been placed on his shoulders.
Right.
I just think we are ill-equipped to manage so much of what life throws at us because so much of it is out of our control.
Right. And a lot of institutions just put the mental health to the side. But now, thanks to the pandemic, it's becoming more of the forefront. People do have anxiety. They do have depression. They do have relationship problems. And this is an anger problems. This is part of life. And companies are starting to realize that, which I think to me is really great progress, like mental health days. And I mean, I have one client that they literally talked about, you get, X number of days for your mental health. And I'm like, that's so great. That's so great. I wish more companies would do that,
Do you think that there is a rise in mental health cases, or do you think there is just a better understanding and a better willingness to address it, talk about it, and treat it as something real versus something, made up? Where does that fall for you? Because I can't believe the number of mental health cases that people seem to be talking about now.
Yeah, well, it's definitely the forefront. I think the pandemic put a match under us. And it literally, like, if you had any issues before the pandemic, it just lit a fire. And I think people realized, oh my God, I can't cope. Because most people don't seek therapy or 12-step recovery until they're hurting. It's got to rot the problem. I'm not going to wake up one day and go, oh, I'm drinking a little too much. Maybe I need AA. No, I'm going to lose a relationship. I'm going to lose a job. I'm going to lose something precious to me. And then it's going to wake me up, maybe, to get recovery.
Yeah.
So, Michelle, where I work and what I do, we kind of get inundated with people using it's almost, to me, like, and one of our counselors on campus said, it's kind of being used as a buzzword. Would you agree with that if someone says, oh, here's my excuse, it's my mental health? I mean,
yeah, that's a really vague way to
because
use
I
that.
don't want to be one of these people that starts brushing someone off if it is a mental health thing. If you just keep hearing someone say, oh, it's my mental health, that's why I'm late, or that's why I haven't done my assignment.
Yeah.
Is that a dangerous thing to do?
Yeah. I mean, to me, even if I said, oh, I'm late because I'm struggling with my recovery. Okay. But is that, we don't want to cry wolf. There may be times in our life that we do say, hey, my mom just died. Or, hey, I'm really struggling with some abuse from my past and I need. But to me, that's a more honest way of communicating than doing the blanket. Because if someone does the blanket, oh, I have mental health issues. What does that mean?
Yeah, get in line.
And it does sound like an excuse. I agree with you.
Yeah. So I just want to make sure I don't want to tip into the wrong side of that one. I just take a breath. I have a mindful moment and go, all right, let's get to the root of what your mental health is and see if it's worthy of an extension.
That's right. Because if they don't have a reason, it's going to be very apparent. They're going to be scrambling for words versus, well, you know what? I'm really struggling with my anger right now and my marriage is on the rocks. Great. At least you have an honest answer.
Right.
So I've got a question for you as well. You said yourself, and we all know that unfortunately, since the pandemic, addiction instances have increased. And you said you're seeing some more anger issues. Mm-hmm. Are they connected? Are you seeing more people because they realize they're addicted, or they're so angry and then they realize part of their anger is they have an addiction?
I think people had the issues before the pandemic, but the pandemic exacerbated them enough to get their attention. But I do think a lot of people, to your point of addiction, there's a lot of studies that showed, the sale of alcohol just went crazy because people were, alone and couldn't leave their house. And so a lot of people who were maybe heavy social drinkers started moving down the chain to really depending on it. So I do think the pandemic created a lot more addiction issues just simply based on the level of stress. But the coping styles and the propensity for the addiction was probably there before the pandemic because, I had no problem not drinking or using food because I have recovery. I don't want drinking was never my thing anyway, but you know what I mean? It's like, so the people who had the tools were the people who were able to navigate the pandemic really well. But sadly, a lot of them, just didn't have them and didn't realize how much they needed them until the pandemic.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point is that people who didn't realize it or who suddenly time became so fluid that, I have a friend who I was having coffee with, and he said to me, COVID, it sort of became acceptable to have a beer at lunch. And that sort of started, suddenly I'm drinking 5 hours earlier than I normally would. Maybe I'm now having 2 beers, then maybe. So by the time I get to my first beer at 5, I might be 4 beers in. And so I think there just was, there was so much less accountability, even if you weren't alone, because you were home and who's looking in your coffee mug? You're on a Zoom call. You don't know what's in this. It was a really fascinating, and I use that both positively and negatively time. So where do you think we're going? If you can put your kind of futurist hat on, Michelle, where are we going with mental health? Are we moving towards addressing it better because the pendulum has really swung so far that we're talking about it all the time now and we'll settle into the middle? Where do you see things?
I do think we are. I think because of the pandemic, these issues are right in people's faces. So there's a lot less stigma because everybody knows someone who struggled during the pandemic. Everybody. Yeah. So it's like, that's the great, gift out of it is that I do think mental health issues and people looking for help has become more normal and more a part of, hey, we need to take care of our mental health. And, you know, a movie like that, that gymnast who decided
Simone Biles.
decided to bow out because of mental health. I mean, that makes an impact.
Yes.
Those people are doing such a service to us by saying, you know what, there's a limit. And the more we do that, and that's part of the reason why I share some of my story, honestly, it's always hard for me because I don't want it to be about me. I want it to be about the person I'm serving, but I want the person I'm serving to connect and say, oh, I'm not alone. Even she has problems. Yeah, we all do. Because that's how we can all bind together.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really important. And I think if we look at other things that have just become accepted culturally, it really was because people just stopped hiding it and started talking about it, started living their lives the way they needed to, and suddenly it was normalized, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
Michelle, how can people find you and your work and your materials and your courses?
It's counselingrecovery.com. And I am actually doing my next Calming Your Anger 4-week class starting August 25th. So if people are interested, they're going to get lots of help, lots of support. And it's not just for the rager. It's funny when I say I work with anger, people go, oh, you know, they kind of have that, oh, you work with rage. But honestly, I work just as much with people who don't honor their anger and they stuff it and they get sick and they get resentful and they do the passive aggressive silent treatment, because that's the other form of unhealthy anger is, I'm not going to let you know how mad I am, but I'm going to make you pay for it because I can't control it. I can't contain it over time, because over time it's going to leak out.
Yikes. So Maz and I are talking to you from the Midwest, which is the mountaintop of passive aggressive land. So it's funny, as you were talking about anger management, I was going to say to you, what should somebody, I'm like, who needs to come to that who's not the person who's punching walls, but actually probably most of us have some level of anger. We're either leaning too far into or not leaning far enough into. So, all right, give me one tip on that, because that I think anger is really tricky.
It is tricky, but sometimes people relate to the word stressed, and it's the same reaction in the body. It's that fight, flight, or fawn response. So one thing I have people do is, and it's super easy, is take your emotional temperature, which means 1 to 10, rate your stress or your anger level. So most of us live at a 1 to 2. We have, all of us have stress going on, but we're good. We're calm. Nothing's happening. Usually when we jump to a 3, 4, we're like, ugh, I can feel it. It's brewing, but it's not that bad yet. So I'm probably going to ignore it. And that's the danger. So I come home, house is a mess. Now I'm a 5. Now I'm yelling. Why is this house a mess? I can't believe it. I didn't need this today. And then if that continues, like maybe my spouse yells back at me, calls me a name, let's just say, then I'm 6, 7, 8, and I'm screaming, and there's no control. There's no coming back from that. But what people don't realize is when somebody explodes in the moment and they go, God, I just the house is dirty. What's the big deal, right? We don't understand that there's a trail of stress that person has not acknowledged yet. And if they can, and when they can, if they could have come home and said, wow, I'm a 5 right now. I'm not going to even come home yet. I'm going to sit in my car and listen to my favorite song. Do something to take care of yourself once you know you're at that 4 or 5 level. Don't ignore it.
Oh, that's really good advice.
Yeah, that is good advice.
When you said most of us live at 1 or 2, I thought, oh dear. I'm not sure I've ever been a 1 or 2.
Yeah, I'm sorry. And I meant, we live that if it's good. But honestly, I had one client, I asked him, I said, what's your number typically when you wake up? And he said an 8. And I was like,
Oh,
holy
wow.
cow,
Yeah.
because of the worry. Worriers
Wow.
tend to wake up and they're like, what do I do today? I'm not going to get anything done. My mom's mad at me. My marriage is terrible. So worry can actually help us get higher on that stress anger scale too. So we really want to watch our thinking, which is all what I address in the course.
Yeah,
Oh,
mindfulness.
really interesting. Probably
It's-
incredibly beneficial for more people than one
Yeah.
would think.
Yeah, it's funny because I wondered who I was going to attract when I started having the class. And I have not attracted anyone who was a domestic violence abuser because that's a different course.
Sure.
I'm attracting the average men and women. They're actually equal in the class.
Oh,
It's not all men. And they just are everyday folks, super sweet, lovely people. They just don't know how to contain it. And it's like, for me, it was so validating because I always knew professionally that, yeah, the average bear, including me, because I was a stuffer, has difficulty with this emotion. And it's really neat to see the everyday person get help, you know, and not lose everything first because you don't need to wait that long to get help.
Yeah.
Well, that's such smart advice for whatever you're struggling with, concerned about, afraid you might be moving toward. You don't have to hit rock bottom to say, boy, I'd love some help. In fact, wouldn't it be great if everybody could get help when they hit that 3-4 point, as opposed to waiting till 7-8 in any area of life that you're struggling with?
Exactly. And that's honestly one of the reasons why I made it 4 weeks, because I knew if I did an 8-week course, people would be like, I don't know if I have that much time. But 4 weeks, people have 4 weeks.
Yeah.
You know, you're in, you're out. And then most of them might want to continue the work at some point doing something else.
Sure. Wow. So interesting, Michelle.
Very
Thank
interesting.
you for sharing all of this with us.
You're welcome. I hope it helped.
Yeah.
Fantastic stuff.
Well, I always, I mean, we love every Thursday conversation we have, and they're always valuable, but it's great when we can occasionally bring somebody on who's talking about addiction from a completely different angle. Because I think, so let me just, I'll say this and then you can tell me if you agree or not. It feels to me like if you're somebody who stuffs your anger down, that's sort of an addiction to the fear of being judged for being not a good girl or too loud or all those things. And if you're somebody who erupts spontaneously, I'm raising my hand there so that Dr. Mary, you don't have to point at me.
I would dare say
I know.
Love the accountability.
Yeah. Then you've got your own issues to manage. And I think a lot of our audience are not people for whom alcohol is their problem, despite the fact that that's sort of the theme of our show. So I love when somebody can come on and say, boy, if you're struggling here, look what we can do to help you with that.
Right. Absolutely. There's so many resources out there.
Well, the reality is none of us gets by without struggling with something.
That's right.
It's about just being okay with that and being okay with asking for help.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, Michelle, thanks so much for joining us today and for the work that you're doing.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
It's
fantastically interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, so we'll be in touch. Everybody else, we will be back on Tuesday. Have a great weekend. Thanks again.